really need to get together and let our voices be heard.
This is Buffalo What's Next. I'm Jay Moran.
I'm Bridget Jaipal Valenza.
And I'm Thomas O'Neill White.
After May 14th, how can we afford not to talk about race?
About education, about segregation, about humanity.
Since the dawn of this nation, racial violence has existed.
The way we have designed our society has a big hand in what occurred in that Tops Market.
The suburban area, everywhere, we must work and teach our children.
We need to make sure that we put more funding in our programs that help prevent gun violence and more money into art.
If we're going to have some real healing, we've got to have space to tell some uncomfortable truths.
Happy Monday morning, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Buffalo What's Next. I'm Lorenzo Rodriguez with you today, and with me here today is Nicholas Ramirez, attorney. He's with the Legal Aid Bureau of Buffalo and primarily specializing in civil rights, civil reentry, formerly of the Criminal Defense Unit with the Legal Aid Bureau. But Nick, welcome. Welcome to Buffalo What's Next.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us on this soggy July 3rd morning here, and pre-July 4th Monday. But I wanted to have you on for some time now because you are a man who knows a number of things when it pertains to criminal defense, with civil rights, social justice reform. We're going to delve into a number of topics here. You kind of do this in one way or another with your Know Your Rights panel through the Legal Aid Bureau. We'll get to that as well, but you're all about educating and hopefully filling in those cracks, those gaps in our legal knowledge base. You're the JD. We're just sometimes caught up in legal cases, and thankfully there are folks like you at the Legal Aid Bureau that are helping us to make sense of all this. And along with this, we're going to try to make sense in some of the big monumental court cases that the Supreme Court just recently ruled on. We had a lot of things to get to here, but Nick, first and foremost, the Legal Aid Bureau of Buffalo. What exactly is it that you do there at the bureau?
Yeah, so I am the civil reentry attorney. So people who have had interactions with the criminal justice system, some of them incarcerated, or some of them simply, dealing with collateral consequences. They're referred to me, or I talk to them, and we try to find options to help them, clear up their record if we can, or get back on their feet. Just generally make it so that this interaction doesn't ruin their life and lead them to circumstances that can lead to another interaction.
We are going to get to the Clean Slate Act, which is there's a big push for it to pass. I think it's about to. All it needs is just Governor Hochul's signature, but we'll get into that in just a minute. But what I was surprised in my research before this interview is that 1 in 3 New Yorkers have had contact with the criminal punishment at some point or another, with the criminal punishment system at one point or another. That's quite a staggering number, and that, I guess, getting a little ahead of ourselves here, but with when it comes to that, with any kind of conviction, it could be anywhere. It's usually felonies that we're talking about, but also misdemeanors. You can also see some jail time as well, or
you can. Okay. Misdemeanors, depending on if it's an A or a B, you can be looking at up to a year.
So that's one of the things that you do with the Legal Aid Bureau of Buffalo, along with criminal defense or defense of the accused and incarcerated, which you all are, if I'm not mistaken, the largest provider of those said services in Western New York, correct? I
believe that's correct, yeah.
That also includes any appeals that stem from that afterwards.
Yep, appeals, post-convictions, post-conviction motions, which are very similar to appeals, but tend to be a little different. If you're ending up in Buffalo City Court, more likely than not, one of our people from our office is representing you.
And as well as those services, you've also the aforementioned reentry project, which we'll get into more detail shortly. Education, litigation, attorneys for children, I know that's huge now with the increase in suspensions and the litigation that stems from that. Housing rights, family stability, workers' rights, consumer rights, immigrant and refugees. You're not immigration law. That's not your specialization, but it's good to see that the Legal Aid Bureau tackles that, because we got a rising number of immigrants in this area that are seeking asylum and caught up in that legal fight of trying to seek asylum here. So, have you seen an increase in that caseload? I assume so.
I have seen the increase, but it's not in our office necessarily. Our immigration unit does a lot of different things, which a lot of respect for Sophie Field and Brittany Triggs, who pretty much are that unit. Brilliant women, brilliant attorneys. A lot of times what we're dealing with is people with immigration issues who have found themselves intersecting with our criminal justice system. So someone gets arrested who isn't a natural-born citizen. Our public defenders refer them to the immigration unit so we can make sure that whatever's happening on the criminal side is, the best possible outcome considering those additional concerns.
Gotcha. And as I mentioned before, one of the services you're providing is the ongoing Know Your Rights sessions. Mm-hmm. What's the kind of information that you're imparting on attendees at those, and what is the Know Your Rights initiative that you have?
Yeah. So Know Your Rights, it's a collaboration. It kind of came from me working with Sam White, our president of the Minority Bar Association. I'm also in the Minority Bar Association. I co-chair the Criminal Justice Reform Task Force.
Fellow Puerto Rican as well. Mm-hmm. Samantha as well. I'm Cuban, so we're the part of the Caribbean Coalition. But
and Drew Friedberg, they are at Neighborhood Legal Services. Okay. So the three of us, and they're with National Lawyers Guild. So it's all four of those organizations, and basically we're trying to present people in communities, the east side, the west side of Buffalo, and everywhere else, if they want, to come in and find out how the system works and a better idea of how we work with them to protect their rights. So example is in the criminal justice system, people know that they have, the right to not be searched. But people don't know what that means. They think maybe they can physically stop the officer from doing it. So the goal of our talk was to say, you can't physically stop them. Mm-hmm. If they're going to do it, despite you saying you don't want them to or saying nothing, and then just decide they're going to search you anyways, don't physically stop them. That's going to put you in danger. That can get you hurt, and I don't want to see that happen. What's going to happen is you're going to work with your attorney after you're arrested to say anything they found they shouldn't have, because they weren't allowed to do that. So instead of framing it as
proper search and seizure,
exactly.
Basically.
So instead of framing it as a defense in the moment that it happens, we're trying to give them the context to understand that it's something we come back to later. So that way people are safe, their rights protected, and then we can work with them to enforce that right.
And what would you say are the biggest misconceptions? You've had a few of those sessions already now. Each of them are dealing with and pertaining to a new topic, right, or a new subject area. What are you seeing, though, is one of the biggest pre-misconceptions that folks are coming in with?
I guess the biggest misconception, or most common one, I'll say, is that there are magic words that will prevent the police from violating your rights.
I want to talk to my lawyer. Exactly.
Now, it doesn't prevent them from doing it. Mm-hmm. It just gives us the ability to do something about it later. When I had that question after we went through the presentation, I had a person who asked, is there anything we can say in that moment to stop it? And I sadly had to tell her, no. If they're intent on, running roughshod over your rights as a person, they can do it. This is all so we can help you later. And that broke my heart to say that, because it shouldn't be that way. Right. But it is. I wanted to be honest. And I think that was the most common misconception, because people have this idea of how the law should work from what we're taught in school. And unfortunately, it's not the reality of it.
The law is changing. It's constantly changing. We're going to see that if we haven't already. It's changing day by day. And I guess, as you're saying, the best thing you can do is just know what's available, what has changed, and and hopefully let your legal representation do the talking and clean everything up afterwards. But
I do just want to clarify,
Yeah.
because I think that is the other misconception. Let your attorney do the talking. Now, you should do that in court. Obviously, that's always the best move. But I do want to alter the framing of it, where it's not that you're letting your lawyer do the talking. You're working with your lawyer so that they can do their part. I always try to convey to my clients that we're partners. I'm not your boss. We're trying to reach your goals, and we're working as a team, because I think it's important for people to have that agency when they're involved in these situations. So that's the only thing I'd say is it's not about letting your lawyer do the work. It's about working with your lawyer.
Right, knowing something right out before that relationship forms, and then that back and forth is I haven't been there yet, but I would assume that it's vital in a client attorney relationship. I'm speaking with Nicholas Ramirez from the Legal Aid Bureau of Buffalo. We're talking all sorts of laws, but mainly civil rights, civil reentry. There's a project that you're firmly attached to, which is the reentry project from the Legal Aid Bureau of Buffalo. What's that program all about?
So that program is basically anything I can fit into it that is going to help people reacclimate or come out on the other end of the criminal justice system in a not bad place. I've had clients who had no jail time, but their licenses were taken, so we work with them to help, figure out how to get their license reinstated. A lot of my work is involving sealing and expungements, so marijuana convictions, because of some recent changes in the law, we can get those expunged from your record sometimes. Sealing, so I'm going back through your record to see, where we can maybe seal a conviction for certain things so that doesn't show up in most general background searches. I also work with a lot of different partners. Catherine Grange at Jericho House, I've worked with her to...
Familiar with Catherine, yep.
Yeah. So basically, I refer clients who need services like inpatient treatment, housing to her. She's also, clients she gets that are more fitted for my program, she's going to recommend them to me. I also put them in contact with different job training programs, employers. In fact, there's several groups that I'm working out the details with, so that people going through their training programs are simultaneously working with me to get their records sealed or expunged, or certificate of relief from disabilities, basically saying, like, these things are there, but you can still do this job while they go through the training program, so that when they finish it, their record's set, they can get their license, they can go straight into the workforce from that training program. So anything I can think of to fit there, I will. We've also helping people contact organizations that deal with police accountability or law enforcement accountability, helping people file complaints with the New York State Division of Human Rights if they're discriminated against in employment.
What were some of those groups that you work with on the police accountability side?
Yeah. So we refer them to private attorneys if necessary. But a lot of it is me collecting their information and sending it over to State AG's office, which has instituted a group to oversee those kinds of complaints, directing them to the proper administrative process for filing a complaint if they feel that they've been harmed or the person didn't do their job as they should have. I don't want to make it seem like we're going after law enforcement in general. Right. It's more about letting people know what the process is and helping them get in contact with people who can help them through that process.
And I'm curious, so we're going to get into the Clean Slate Act that I mentioned off the top, but I know with the new laws pertaining to marijuana dispensaries and use in New York State, that's a big thing because we have so many prior convictions. How is that unfolding now in your that you're seeing? Are we being successful in trying to help or getting enough folks having that expunged from their records? Is that changing? Are they just is this an unfortunate turn of events that they can't right at this point, or what's the status of individuals facing those types of convictions?
What I'm generally seeing is that the process to get those expunged is pretty straightforward. We haven't been getting a lot of pushback on people trying to get them expunged for most cases. Some cases might be a little different. If they're, the previous charge was a part of how their sentence was determined for something else that was unrelated to it, we might have a little more trouble there. I hesitate to say it's a success or not a success just because, every individual is being affected differently by it. Mm-hmm. And for some of them, it won't give them the best assistance that they could. And for some people, it's a total life changer. I will say, though, that as far as I've seen, as far as my efforts, the people I've helped, it's been a pretty straightforward process for the most part. And it's one of those places that we really do have to get creative with lawyering sometimes if it's related to their sentence. And we have to say, like, listen, you sentenced them on something more serious, but, this really shouldn't have affected it.
And that stays on there unless you do anything about it. Those convictions, misdemeanors for the most part, I assume, or felony. Possession. A
lot of them were felonies at one point, and part of what we are doing is going back and seeing that they've been reduced to misdemeanors. And that's part of what the changes in the law did. It made it so that things, you could argue that they weren't a crime anymore, or you could show that they were no longer a felony or, a higher class of misdemeanor, and say that they should have been reduced to this. And so all the cases I've seen, I think I've only had one or two that were misdemeanors originally. They were all felonies.
Right.
Okay. But they were felonies from, the war on drugs, meaning that now they're like, at worst, a B misdemeanor, which is the lowest level of misdemeanor, or even a violation, which is not even a crime.
Which seems so far away. The Bush years.
Yeah.
We've come a long way since that, but we're still, like we said, things are changing. I'm glad to see that there's some understanding there. Because you get a lot of I'm sure you've seen a lot of clients, a lot of individuals that this is a albatross that just hangs with them for years upon end. And this is kind of a cyclical situation where you're back in the jailing system because you can't really go into straight line of work almost. And then if and when you do get convicted, you go to the holding center down here in downtown Buffalo, or the Alden Correctional Facility, which now another conversation that we're having here in Buffalo is the new jail, the proposed jail, something along the lines of like $250 million to be built in. I think up until the other day, the proposed site has been the Buffalo Grand Hotel, our neighbors down here in downtown Buffalo, but we've got the correctional facility the holding center not too far down the road, the city hall, city courts, and all conveniently placed. But what are the concerns that you're seeing? We've had on Monica Lynch, who's a firm advocate for no new jail. What are you seeing with current jailing conditions and with this new proposed one down here in downtown Buffalo?
Well, so I've been dealing with conditions in the jails since I was a law student. The Civil Rights Clinic at the law school, we sued for records regarding the 34 people who had died in there under former Sheriff Howard's watch. And, I was part of that litigation. I argued the appeal that we won against them, and that I spent 2 years of law school in that project. And I've continued in that sphere, I guess, a little bit since I graduated. Props to Heather Abraham, Mike Higgins for getting me started in that. I think some of the concerns are, I was trying to think of how to phrase this last night. To me, it's like moving to a new house because your current house is dirty. Mm-hmm. So yes, a new jail, you're going to have, less rodents, bugs, probably better, structure. Things won't be falling apart as much. There's been huge water issues in the current facility. You're going to have all of those things, just like if you move to a new house because your old house was dirty, it's going to be nice and clean when you move in. But that doesn't address the problems that led to this place becoming like that. So some of the concerns that we've had from various members of the Minority Bar Association of Western New York's Criminal Justice Reform Task Force are things like concerns about officer training in these facilities. Are they being trained to handle medical crises and recognize red flags for self-harm? Because that was, what happened to now 36 people that have died in the jails. Are they training them to recognize their own racial issues? I've gone to the jails. I can say that the guards have largely been nothing but polite and nice to me. But at the same time, I have seen people who work in those facilities who have white supremacist tattoos. And, if you're a person of color, which is largely the people who are in those facilities, can you possibly feel safe when the people responsible for your safety have those things? So those are some concerns. I think there's additional concerns with how much money we're putting into this new facility when that money could be used to fix the current facility and pay for training for guards and put them in a better position to, help the people that are in there. Could we use that money to repair the facility and just, that way we still got the two, but they're both in, better upkeep. Condensing the jails to one location while the people who are in those facilities, they're not all from one location. With the facility downtown, you have people who their families and friends, their lawyers can come see them pretty easily. Or not easily, but they can take a bus. Right. They can take an Uber or something like that.
I know that there's a big transportation concern currently.
Yeah.
This would help alleviate it, but
I don't think it would. Because either way, you're going to have people move from one facility to another. And, one facility's, they're going to have people that are local to that area put into a different location.
And this will be a county jail, so
yeah,
you're getting folks from all throughout Erie and Buffalo proper. I'm speaking with Nicholas Ramirez, civil reentry attorney with the Legal Aid Bureau of Buffalo. And another component of this is, we kind of touched on it prior to the jail discussion, the Clean Slate Act. It's it's gained as much steam as it needs. It passed the state Senate, and it's only waiting upon Governor Hochul's signature to become law. What do you see? Do you foresee an obstacle to it?
I know that Hochul's made some comments that she's a little hesitant because it doesn't, there's some concerns she had regarding certain acts. But it definitely seems like she's come to the point where she's going to sign it. She's just, being cautious. Knock on wood, Hopefully that'll get signed, though. I think that's going to be a benefit to a lot of people. And
just to kind of, for those that are not aware of what it entails, what is the Clean Slate Act?
So the Clean Slate Act it's essentially going to take away a lot of work from me, which is
that's a good thing in this case.
I'm happy for it. So rather than having to get someone to file a motion with the court to have your record sealed for certain things, it would just automatically seal them after a certain period of time. So if it's a misdemeanor, most misdemeanors, it'll be 3 years, most felonies, 8 years. There are exceptions. I know that one of the big ones is sexual crimes, which have their whole separate, issues that you need to resolve.
Is that currently in the version of the act?
That's currently exempt.
Okay.
Because of its nature.
Yep.
Yeah. But there are exceptions also for immigration, which at first I was like, well, why? But then one of our Brittany Triggs from our office explained to me, she was like, well, no, you don't want to seal those because you want the attorney for them and their immigration proceedings to see it. And, then I have other options available for them. So overall, it looks like the bill is a net benefit. I think that there's more we can do, but at this point, I think it's going to be huge for anyone who's still got that, felony. I've got clients who have felonies from 20 years ago, from when they were teenagers, doing things that teenagers do when they're impulsive. and to just have this gone without needing to go through all of the work with me to get it gone, I think it would just be a huge relief for them.
So it would pretty much be an automatic
Yep.
trigger process where you already start going into the expungement.
Well, you go into the
proceeding,
sealing
or the sealing?
automatically. Yeah, expungement means it never happened. Sealing just means that it's there, but you can't see it except certain conditions.
Do you notice that there's an abundance of folks that don't know that these options are available?
Oh yes, I do a lot of outreach events, and I do them because a lot of people don't realize these are available. So whenever I'm at these events talking to people at a table and they mention something to me, and I can tell them, like, actually, no, you can get that sealed. Go to this website, apply for my office, or call me, and I'll help you with the process of applying for our help, and let's get that taken care of. I picked up 5 different people last week from Meriwether Library who had no idea that we could do these kinds of things to help them. And they were struggling to find work. They were struggling to maintain their housing. So yeah, I think the automatic is going to be a huge help, and also it's retroactive. So it'll go back for anyone who would have qualified before it was put in place. It'll automatically apply to them too. I believe it's a 120-day timeline that they have to get everything set when it goes into effect, and after that you have a civil cause of action to sue if they don't do it. So,
Is there any action that has to be done if this were to already get signed into law? Is there a process that needs to be done, or is it just automatic?
Just
basically?
automatic. As soon as it gets signed into law, basically, the different courts start going to work, sealing records, and putting people in a better position than they were.
And one question that's been lingering, because I've spoken to some fellow attorneys that are in the immigration side of things, and the biggest concern there is just the caseload. Are you seeing that is also an issue in the criminal defense world? Is that also as mounting as there's a lot of, for them? It's been just a lot of slow moving cases. We had Gretchen Gonzalez from the Volunteer Lawyers Project not too long ago, and the big thing for her is she's still trying to get Afghani refugees asylum here in the States, and that was December of 2021 when they fled. The Afghanistan. We saw those pictures in the news. But are you seeing the same as far as just an abundance of work and not enough bodies to go around to tackling them in the criminal side?
So I would say it's nowhere near what immigration attorneys may be dealing with, considering that they have federal laws that they have to deal with, and federal tends to move, slower, have a lot more nuance and a lot of different areas you have to know. So props to anyone doing that work. I will say that when I was in CDU, it could depend, because, depends on how many people are being called in that day. I personally felt it was manageable, but also very stressful and could lead to some very heartbreaking circumstances. I'm not going to deny having 1 or 2 clients that I may have cried a little bit after I felt like I let them down. And this is what I've seen from my colleagues as well. Like they all work extremely hard to keep their caseloads managed and up, and make sure that they're communicating with people as often as possible, and dealing with the overall stressors. So I'd say caseload number wise, it might be higher. Our cases are a little more streamlined in a lot of ways, but I don't think they're any less emotionally devastating when you can't help the person.
Well, we are going to continue, unfortunately, in that same vein with the second half of our conversation, but we're going to take a quick break. Before that, just want to remind everyone I'm speaking with Nicholas Ramirez, attorney for the Legal Aid Bureau of Buffalo. We're going to get into something that affected us on a national level, will affect us locally. We're very much a local show, but it's going to show itself out here in Buffalo. The Supreme Court rulings of last week. We'll get to those in just a minute after our break here on Buffalo What's Next. Please stay with us.
This is Buffalo What's Next, where we have conversations with the community about moving forward. To have your voice heard, press the Talk to Us button on the WBFO app, and we'll work to get your questions and comments on the air. Join us on Twitter @WBFO or email us at news@WBFO.org. Together, we'll have the conversations that are needed. This is WBFO, your NPR station.
Welcome back to Buffalo What's Next. I'm Lorenzo Rodriguez, joined by Nicholas Ramirez, an attorney with the Legal Aid Bureau of Buffalo, doing a number of great things with the prior with the Criminal Defense Unit, now in the civil reentry project portion of what the Bureau is doing, but also informing, educating, helping break down the convoluted world of legal law, and just making it simpler for simpler minds like myself. Nick, thank you once again for joining us. We were talking the local aspect of things, the reentry project that you're associated with, the Clean Slate Act of New York that's right there on Governor Hochul's desk, ready to be passed. But now let's go a little bit wider scope here. If you've been listening to the news as of late, there's been the SCOTUS has been busy. The Supreme Court of the United States has been very busy, setting back, wiping clean decades of precedents that we had prior to this past week. And we'll get to them each in detail or one way or another. But what was your feeling right off the bat after just, it felt like it was one hit after the other, bam, 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 bam. We have the affirmative action ruling. We had the creative, the 303 creative versus Elenis or the freedom of speech First Amendment case, and then we had the loan debt forgiveness ruling as well. What were your thoughts after all those concurrent rulings came by?
So a lot of disappointment. When I went to law school, I actually dreamed of one day being someone who argued in front of the Supreme Court. I always tried to give benefit of the doubt to opinions I didn't agree with, to justices I didn't agree with, because I believed a lot of them were acting in good faith and trying to reach the just outcome. But I think a lot of us who felt that way 1L year of law school kind of evolved in our belief, and I think that hit me particularly hard with some of the cases in the last few years, and this term was no exception.
Lump that in also. I can't gloss over at the Roe v. Wade decision.
Yep.
Dobbs. It just, and even I was speaking with a gentleman last week about the 303 creative case, and we were awaiting the ruling on that. I said to myself, I thought we had been over this one already with the Colorado cake maker, and yet this we'll get into. You know what? Let's start with that one because, to my knowledge, we had already kind of gone over the right to refuse business based on religious beliefs or free speech grounds. This was 303 Creative LLC versus Elenis, and it was a 6-3 in favor of 303. Christian web designer Lori Smith from Colorado refused to do business. Now, I want your expertise here because, to my knowledge, this was a hypothetical that was argued here. She refused to do business with LGBTQ plus clientele based on her religious beliefs, freedom of speech grounds. You can do that? You can have a fictitious litigant?
Well, kind of addressing that first point, no. It's called an advisory opinion. And generally in federal courts, you cannot seek an advisory opinion. It's because the courts have a limited power, or at least they're supposed to have a very limited power to determine case and controversies. And I think it's really important to look at the hypothetical here because I think it kind of informs a lot of the problems with the decision. So 303 Creative, it did kind of follow up on Masterpiece Cake Shop. Masterpiece Cake Shop, the court didn't decide the merits really of whether or not the cake decorator had this right. They really just kind of kicked it back saying, oh, well, the Colorado board made some comments about religion that show, maybe he didn't get a fair hearing. So, do the hearing again, give him a fair hearing. A lot of us at the time felt like that was really just the court trying to avoid the hard question because of just the circumstance of it. But, we took it for what it was. 303 Creative, and this is the problem with advisory opinion when you're talking hypotheticals. You don't have any facts to really look at to determine it. So you see this a lot in the opinion, where you have Justice Gorsuch really, talking about this in the broadest terms of, oh, well, it's a message she doesn't agree with, and this is an individual, piece of art and such. Well, we don't know that. We don't know what the process actually is for designing the websites because she's never done it. She's never designed a wedding website, period. And we also see this in Justice Sotomayor's dissent, where she's pointing to all the hypotheticals because she's like, we don't have anything to really root this in. And
basically, you're suing the law. You're trying to make it absolve or get rid of the law, so as to be able to then claim that you don't have to do business with said parties.
More, you're trying to make an exception that pretty much anyone can use now because we don't have solid facts. So, I think it was really demonstrative during the oral argument. Justice Jackson referred to, a Santa scene set in the 1950s. Well, could they say a black child can't be in it because, that's not part of their classic vision of, It's a Wonderful Life. It's like, how do you answer that considering this context? And I think that's one of the first problems you see with this decision is all these hypotheticals. There's no solid facts to root this in. It's also demonstrates a lot of the justices don't seem to have a firm grasp on discrimination law. Because in oral argument, you saw Justice Alito ask, well, would a black Santa be able to refuse to take pictures with a kid dressed in a KKK outfit? Well, wearing a KKK outfit isn't a protected class. It's very different from your skin color. I mean, I don't think anyone disputes that. And that's a lot of what you're seeing to justify the decision now is like, well, you guys don't have to make cakes for MAGA people. And it's like, well, no, you never had to. This was purely about a person's, person.
Do you think we'll go in that route?
I think it's inevitable because they didn't draw a line. They couldn't draw a line between race and, being gay or being trans. There's a reason you can't draw a line because those are all parts of who you are. And that's where we've understood a protected class to come from. So the decision doesn't even try to draw a line there. I think it's because to the justices, and it may seem obvious, like, no, that's obviously different. Refusing to bake a cake for a black couple or an interracial couple, it's obviously different than baking a cake for a gay couple, or designing a website for a gay couple is different from interracial or black couple. But how? I can't think of an answer to that. I don't think that they could either, and I think that's why it's absent in the opinion.
There's so much to delve into here. But we have two other monumental cases too, or rulings rather. First, let's do the fiscal side. The loan debt forgiveness ruling. Now, it's to my understanding that President Biden's going to try to fight this in one way or another using the 1965 Higher Learning Act, but he's got a long road ahead once again. Thoughts on this one?
This is one that really showed bad faith on the justice part, in my opinion, because there was no injury here. So they took this argument from the state that the state had created this independent company to handle student loan servicing, and that company might lose money, which would, make them unable to pay the state. It's all speculation, for one. And two, the company itself said, no, we actually profit from this decision. This company refused to get involved. And especially because I come from the criminal defense side, where the police could get an illegal confession from someone else and use it against you. They just can't use it against that person.
Right.
And now the state can go and say, well, we're going to, try to enforce this group's rights, and that group's like, what rights? I'm good. I'm not in this. Like,
right.
Yo,
I'm not having this fight.
I'm going to get more money from this.
I don't want the smoke.
Exactly. So, the fact that the justices did this really twisty, turny way to find standing in itself bothered me.
Correct me if I'm wrong, was this the Supreme Court taking this on themselves, or did it start in a federal circuit?
So the Supreme Court doesn't take courts as an original jurisdiction, with very limited, exceptions to that. Usually they're a court of appeals. And this came from a lower court that had, enjoined this policy. And the whole thing was just kind of a mess. It also included what's called the major questions doctrine, where Congress is supposed to speak clearly about what it wants done.
I saw that. What can you explain that a little bit in detail?
Yeah, so I guess the major questions doctrine means if it's a question of great political or economic significance, Congress has to speak explicitly. So I think in this case, I guess the idea would be if Congress wanted the president to be able to forgive student loans in the sense of COVID, then Congress would pass a law saying that the president can forgive student loans because of COVID. Problem with that is that we pass laws with broad language intentionally to allow, quicker response. Also, okay, maybe you can estimate economic, I guess. I don't really think that's the place for the court, but fine, whatever. But how do you estimate political significance? Because you can make any issue political. I mean, years ago,
we've seen that now in one way or another.
Who would have thought that the Electoral College decision would be politically controversial? So, the whole thing was just this very wishy-washy and indeterminable standards, kind of similar to some of the things that were raised with affirmative action. And so that really frustrates me that it's very clear that this was just an outcome-driven result meant to stop this administration from doing something.
And then there was the other, I guess, double whammy, the affirmative action ruling. Mm-hmm. Now, basically, universities can no longer consider race when accepting new students, or at least they're not obligated to do so. Affirmative action had been this piece of legislation back in the 70s, I believe, that we got it on the books, and then now it no longer is criteria for new secondary, post-secondary school students. But this one, there was a lot more. It seemed to me from the general criticism I've heard, it's still very much unclear. The schools can still continue to practice looking at race, but it's not an obligation.
Well, it's never been an obligation. I think that's the first thing to clarify. Schools were allowed to do so. And in some states, they actually banned its use, period. They banned use of race, period. Those states were especially instructive because once they banned consideration of race, period, they saw a sharp decrease in, students of color. And that's not just, Black students. That's Latino students. That's Asian students. So it was never a mandate. It was always a policy that was used to try and diversify the student body.
Just to give some equity where is needed.
Well, I mean, that might be one way to phrase it. The courts, have gone through a couple different things that you were allowed to do it for. At one point, you could look to remedying history, but you couldn't look to that anymore. Most recently, it's been you can use it to build a diverse student base because that benefits everyone. It's always had this. It never wanted to acknowledge what it was. The court never really wanted it to be acknowledging that people from those groups had been set back by who they were. So, they wanted it to have something else, which was this, eventually settled on this diversity of a student body. But now they can't consider them in the holistic approach that they normally take. So normally, and Roberts lays this out even in his opinion, which is why it's so strange to me that he phrases this as completely determinative. But there's basically like 5 steps to the process that start with like your grades and scores, and they whittle it down, they whittle it down, they whittle it down. Then they're like, okay, we're definitely admitting these students. And then there's like, okay, we got these slots left. And this is a whole huge process. So let's say they've got 500 spots left out of 2,000 students, and they say, okay, well, the current looks like we actually dropped like 3% in African American students this year from last year, and you've got that this pool of like 1,000 students that you're like, oh, they're on the fence. So you got 500 slots left. Okay, well, we dropped an African American, recognizing that there's different conditions that you live with growing up, recognizing that there's different interactions that you have with this country growing up. Let's take a look and maybe add a point to them. It was really made so that it wasn't denying people a spot based on their race. It wasn't taking a point away, but it was recognizing that we need a diverse student body for people to be prepared to enter the real world and to try and make the college campus reflective of America.
And as you said, you saw a drop off when that wasn't being drop off of minority, marginalized members when it wasn't being considered. So it just seems like you want to have the faith in the highest court in the land, but a lot of rulings against the most marginalized of our society. Speaking with Nicholas Ramirez of the Legal Aid Bureau of Buffalo, talking some Supreme Court rulings and the ramifications of it. Now we see this, as you mentioned, it can be affirmative action was being employed in multiple areas, but how could this ruling affect employers or DEI initiatives? That's been a term that everyone's been harping on because one way or another. But how could this go into the private sector? I know that American Airlines, Match Group, Google, I think Dell also, they warned in a brief to the Supreme Court that without affirmative action, they're going to lose access to a number of future workers and business leaders, and they're going to struggle with meeting diversity hires. But do you see some of that potentially?
I definitely do. I definitely think that with this kind of ruling, so I've done some discrimination law cases, and what I think we're going to see is anytime a company has a commitment to DEI, you're going to have grounds for someone who doesn't get a job to go in and say, I didn't get it because I'm white. And they have this DEI program which shows that they favor Black and Latino people, because the court's stated goal here was that America needs to be colorblind. We can't pay attention to the fact that there's been less opportunities, less access to opportunities for, people of color. We can only think everyone has to have the same, treatment and access.
We don't see color.
Yeah.
But in saying that, you're also not looking at the problems that people of color.
You're not engaging with reality.
Yep.
And I mean, that comes from the justices themselves, I think, having not had to engage with those things a lot. They get to look at everything in this very abstract position of, they remove the race from it and say, if this person gets it because their skin color is this color, but this person doesn't, then it's automatically racist, when you need to include the color. You need to see that this Black person getting, this recognized as getting this additional point to get into these programs or get into this job, it's because you're recognizing that in general there's a problem in our systems that they've never accounted for. It wasn't just you end slavery and boom, racism's over. You pass the Equal Rights Act, boom, racism's over. March across the Edmund Street Bridge, boom, racism's over. It doesn't work that way. People are still treated differently, and they just have this more subtle way that they do it sometimes. Maybe sometimes not even that subtle, to be honest. And I'll give you an example. I was in the public defender unit, primarily serving east side and west side of Buffalo, which are primarily Black and Latino. We had 3 people of color in that unit. Me, an amazing public defender named Michael Mingo, who did the Know Your Rights panel with me, and another incredible public defender, Moody, who was with us every step of that way. I just want to make sure I put some respect on their names because the 2 of them are both amazing individuals.
Proper shout outs there.
Yeah. But there's over 20 attorneys in that unit. And in general, in the law, Latinos like you and me, we're 5% of it. Black people are 5 to 6% of it. That right there should show you that
while
there's
our
a
population
difference.
Numbers are drastically different.
The
composition of the makeup of our society, our American society, is vastly different in percentage points. We have a few more minutes here, Nick, but I just wanted to ask, we're the federal judge appointments that we had, the record-setting federal judge appointments in the last few years by the Republican administration prior to this one. That's part of this, right?
Oh,
like
yeah.
These cases are going to come up in more and more frequency because of these federal judges that seemingly, I don't want to speculate like this, but seemingly have conservative leanings and are trying to, as we're already seeing, clear the slate of prior precedents that were progressive in nature. Do you foresee more of this coming, unfortunately?
Unfortunately, I do. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of conservative justices I've met, conservative attorneys I've met who actually have, very, very strong approases to equality and fairness.
They're impartial.
great.
The job
They're great
requires
people.
impartiality.
Even when they're impartial, they'll recognize the realities of life. I think usually where we differ is on how you enforce those things. But there are also some who are just willing to say, I have the power and I'm going to use it.
And I mean, I also glossed over the EPA ruling that basically the federal wetlands ruling. It was a close one. I think it was 5-4 vote in that case that limited government authority and departmental oversight. That one's going to also show some. We're going to see some ramifications of that one for a while because basically dulled the teeth of a lot of government agencies, if I'm not mistaken. The EPA was the one in this one, but
yeah. There's been a concerted effort to dull the teeth of the EPA and generally to make agencies have less discretion, which is alarming because the agencies have the expertise to make these determinations. And something that a judge doesn't have. I went through law school and I've got legal training. I don't know anything about environmental regulations. I also don't know how to trace history to determine what the founders' original intents were. And those aren't things that we're trained to do. And the fact that they are assuming that people are assuming now that judges have this knowledge from no experience in those fields, it's concerning, but it's just going to require us to put more effort into fighting back.
Well, I, for one, I'm glad that you went through the legal training, that you did the hard work and research for these things, because just preparing for these types of, I hope that I do this subject matter proper justice. That's not a legal pun there. I'm just because it's important, and I think a part of it is being aware of what the law is, how it's changing, how it's going to affect us. And I'm glad that there are individuals such as yourself that are doing that, and also doing that with the outreach programs that you have. The Know Your Rights panel. I wanted to give you a minute or two here to explain it, and how can people get in contact with the Legal Aid Bureau to learn a little bit more.
Yeah. So Know Your Rights panel, we basically break it down for a layman because these things are not written to be easily read. We let you know what your rights are and how we can work with you to protect them. Last one was was interactions with law enforcement, which I think we'll be doing again at some point. But this week, the 6th, at the Frankie Merriweather Library, we'll be talking about your rights as a tenant in housing. We'll also have attorneys there to provide advice and counsel, and we'll have a lot of those coming up.
Got one on suspension, school suspensions. That's
in the early stages, but yeah, that's gonna be coming up too.
A lot of good stuff that you are imparting on the layman populace of Buffalo. So I thank you for that. Nicholas Ramirez, attorney, civil rights and civil reentry attorney with Legal Aid Bureau of Buffalo. Thank you so much for educating us, for teaching us a little bit something here today. Hopefully we can have you again and continue this conversation. But thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
And you have been listening to Buffalo What's Next on WBFO and WBFO HD1 Buffalo, WOLN Olean, and WUBJ Jamestown, your NPR station.